John Wall is going to be a max player. He's going to get his money. Ernie Grunfeld and the Washington Wizards would be absolute fools not to take care of him. But I think there's some paper like the Washington Express or whatever the case may be. I know it's not the Washington Post or the not Washington Times, but they've got a picture of John Wall wearing in a Jedi kind of uniform, Max. He has to be that dude. It's just that simple. The Washington Wizards are not deep enough, not gifted enough, evidently not focused enough when they're on the road, not seasoned enough, not disciplined enough to do this without him. John Wall is the leader. John Wall is the star. He's not the highest paid individual. That would happen to be Bradley Beal, and that brother needs to show up tonight as well, and I believe he will. But it's important that John Wall be spectacular in this particular game, because you need incentive and you need an elevated level of motivation in order to go at Boston in a Game 7 if you're fortunate enough to push this series to that situation. John Wall, they lost the last game. They won the game before that. But John Wall has shot 15 of 42 from the field over the last 2 games. That's relatively pedestrian. That's not the 40.13 assist performance that we saw from him in Game 2. It's not the 42-point performance we saw from him in the closeout game in Atlanta in the first-round series. It's not the spectacular play that we've been watching him produce and averaging 27 and 12 overall in this series. Moments matter, and that's what John Wall has to realize in this particular game. It's not about you dropping 30. It's not about you exploding in the first half but disappearing in the second half. It's not about you leaning on anybody else for them to get it done. You are the inspirational and motivational leader for this franchise. You're the face of it. You're everything to it. They go as you go. And y'all stunk up the joint in Boston in Game 5 to such a degree that the Washington Wizards should have actually given money back to Wizards fans who actually traveled to Boston to support the team for Game 5, because they pulled what we would call this morning a James Harden. They did not choose to show up at all. You cannot do that in Game 6 tonight in the nation's capital. John Wall has got to show up, and he has got to remind the Boston Celtics, if you're going to win this series, you have to deal with me. That is what stars do, Max Kellerman. James Harden didn't do it last night. If John Wall doesn't do it tonight, it will be bad for him to be piggybacking off that performance.
Well, actually, what you point out, that there's not really enough around him quite. He has a lot around him, but not quite enough, is the reason why it's not as big a game as it was, for example, for James Harden. I think you're a year early on this one. Is it a big game? Of course. They need him to win. He should play well. He's a superstar, and he should take the next step in his career and all those sorts of things. But if he has a bad game, that does not brand him a choking kind of player as James Harden. James Harden just cemented his reputation. Not forever, but for now. He is a choker. I mean, that's how we're going to think of him. There are different kinds of players. You know, they establish a baseline of production normally, and then you look at them under pressure. Do they stay the same? If you're really good, like Tom Brady or Derek Jeter, and you don't change, you're considered clutch because you're always good. If you get even better under those circumstances, you know, you're Mariano Rivera or Michael Jordan, which is impossible. You're the best ever. You get even better. But if you fall off, you know, you're Peyton Manning for a while, or Alex Rodriguez, even if you're really good, or James Harden. John Wall's not in that category yet. Even if he has a bad game, he won't be in that category because people were not quite expecting this year because of the chemistry issues with Bradley Beal in the previous season, because their front court isn't quite good enough. We all recognize that because this is still LeBron James's era. What I will say is if John Wall isn't big in Game 6 and they lose, next year he will be facing the kind of situation that James Harden was facing this year. But that doesn't apply yet. By the way, you say he will be a max player. Stephen A., he already is a max player because Max loves him. But Max also needs to see him play big in these games. And I am telling you, even if he doesn't here, he still has a little slack, unlike a guy like Harden, who's failed too often in the past in those situations.
Max, you're absolutely unequivocally wrong. And I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. Because of what you said just over a week ago. You talked about LeBron James. You talked about Boston. with the money to go after a Gordon Hayward in free agency, plus the multitude of draft picks. You talked about those two teams. You talked about the elevation of Toronto because of Serge Ibaka being there and what have you. And you alluded to the window of opportunity being what it is for the Washington Wizards to be at this point. So taking that into consideration, he doesn't have next year to lean on. He has to snatch the moment now. There's something to be said. Now, you're right in terms of it's not as important as James Harden, because James Harden was in, the closeout game last night on his home court, and a lot of people looked at Houston as having, an advantage because of their tempo, their style of play, the fact that they had more shooters. I'm saying to you, when we look at Boston and we look at Washington, we look at the depth on Boston. You've alluded to the coaching of Brad Stevens. Right. You've lamented the coaching of Scott Brooks. And so as a result of all of that, what I'm saying to you is, if you're looking at it from that perspective, I get where you're coming from. The problem is that if you're John Wall, this is your moment. This is your moment.
You seem to be arguing that their window. Your argument seems to be based on the idea that their window isn't what the Boston Celtics window is, so there's more urgency for John Wall.
No.
But urgency for what? To get smacked by the Cavs in the next round?
No. Right. Because what I'm saying is, John, you get to a point where there's no excuse. You ever had one of those situations? There's no excuse to lose to anybody but that person. In other words, if you're John Wall, if you're John Wall, you should not be losing to Isaiah Thomas and the Boston Celtics. You should not be in a situation where you're shooting 15 or 42 over the last two games.
It ain't going to help him. If he plays bad, it's not going to help him. Of course, it helps him to play well.
I'm saying you have to prioritize. You got to look at the personnel around you, and you have to prioritize. This is my moment.